Okay, we are now live. I would like to, on behalf of Improving and as a part of the EDGE conference, welcome all of you to my breakout. My name is Rand Stagen. I run the Stagen Leadership Academy in Dallas, Texas, and I have been a longtime stakeholder of Improving, having the opportunity to work with dozens of their leaders over many years. And it was a treat to be invited to participate in the virtual conference today. On the topic of managing chaos and leadership in the context of our current economic conditions and the current complexity that we're all facing, whether it's a complexity in a more of a localized way, a regionalized way, nationally, or for many of you that are a part of global organizations, much more on a macro level on the entire system. So a couple of housekeeping items. This is a more of a traditional, even though we're using Zoom technology, which we're really excited about, this is a little bit more of a traditional webinar where I will be speaking to you in more of a presentation format with slides. We're really hopeful that we'll be positioned to take advantage of the chat function and the Q&A function. Justin is available for tech support. And Justin, can you just say hello so they can hear your voice?
Hey, yeah, I'll be helping Rand out with the questions and stuff.
Awesome. So he's going to be doing a support role and be my partner to make sure we can create an interactive experience for all of you as attendees. In addition to our 1 hour together with presentation, with slides, and with chat and Q&A, this is being recorded and will be available on the Improving site, on the YouTube site on Monday, if you want to reference back or you want to share it. And so with that, let's go ahead and Justin, just see if we could get a little chat moving, just so we can make sure that the chat function is live. And if anyone just wants to say hello and where you're actually calling in from, that'd be fun to see cities on the screen there. So anyone can open up the chat function. All right, we've got Cleveland, we've got Georgia. Awesome. Welcome, Chris. Welcome, Jeremy, Mark, and we have Dallas, Calgary, all right, Florida, Columbus, Houston. Look at all this, Minneapolis. All right, guys, so that just warmed up the chat function. We may use chat as our primary way to interact, but there's also a Q&A functionality. So if you have a specific question, Justin's going to be teeing those up, and I'll be able to reference that in our queue. So now the logistics are cleared. Let's jump in. The first thing I want to do is really ask all of you as attendees. You've decided to attend this particular breakout of the digital conference. So there's something around the topic of leadership, whether you're in an organizational leadership role or a functional leadership role, or even if you're in an individual contributor role. I want to invite all of us to see our role as leaders, whether that's at work, whether that's at home with our families, whether that's in our communities, and move beyond the actual title that you may carry on your business card, and really step into this question of how can we identify as leaders, and therefore as those taking responsibility for creating positive change in the world. And so I'm assuming everyone here has this mindset that you are a leader and you have a commitment to learn how to lead more effectively. So when we think about leadership, one way, while that's a very broad and abstract concept, one way to really orient to this question of what does it mean to lead, I'm going to suggest the angle of how we relate to the world around us. So at our Leadership Academy, there's a concept that it's not about what happens, but rather how we relate to what happens. It's not about what happens, but how we relate to what happens. And so this idea of relating, being in a relationship to the world around us, And so I'd like you to think about how you relate to those that you work with, your coworkers, how you relate to your family, how you relate to the external environment. You could wake up in the morning and have plans that require it to be a sunny day and it's raining. So how do you relate to that experience? You may be running late to a meeting and you're in traffic. How do you relate to the fact that you're in traffic? And so this is going to be at the end of the presentation. We're going to clear a little bit about the macro environment, and then we're going to spend most of our time, especially on the interactive portion, really getting into this exploration of our relationship to those people and those things and those circumstances that are outside of us. Sometimes this is considered a dance where we're shaping the world and being shaped by the world, and just moving in and out of a dynamic and sometimes a dynamic tension where we feel challenged, we feel at our edge, we feel beyond our skill set, our capacity, which is really where growth happens. And so what I'd like to do is introduce, as it's said in the abstract for today's presentation, introduce a little bit of a concept around megatrends. And so up on the screen here, I'm going to clear a set of megatrends that were actually introduced by Price Waterhouse, the global consulting firm. While there are a lot of different ways to speak to the changes that are going on in the global marketplace, I personally found these when they came out several years ago to be really accessible and really helpful. I'm going to clear them relatively quickly, and then we'll reference back to these. But I want you all to be thinking about in your own exploration of leadership for yourself. Ask yourself if you're paying attention to these broad trends that are happening in the marketplace. And the first trend is demographic and social change. And this one's pretty front and center, especially for those of us who are in North America, dealing with social justice, what the experience has been for leaders on the other side of the pandemic, what's the experience been on the other side of George Floyd's murder. There have been a lot of disruptions and a lot of changes that have pointed to the need for social change, but also being fueled by demographic change in the incredible diversity that we're seeing, especially in the young population in America. Where for those that are under 18, we're now, as it was recently described to me, we're now experiencing demographically the first time that the white population is not a majority. And so I was talking to a consultant who works at the global level with C-suite executives, and she was talking about the idea of the economics of inclusion. That if you're going to be a continued strong brand in the marketplace, that you're going to be wanting to think about demographic changes and diversity, not just at a social level, which is clearly important, but also at an economic level. How do you actually maintain serving the needs of your customers as your customers become more and more diverse? The second PwC global megatrend is shift in global economic power. And so we're seeing this also very front and center right now with China. The growth of China in population, the growth of India in population, and the power shift that will come in the coming decades because of that. And then we're also asking ourselves, I think those that are paying attention to global trends, what are the implications from a consumer standpoint in the continent of Africa? And while that is going to be a longer term question, all of us are going to want to be thinking about what are the shifts that will impact us, especially in the United States, that'll impact us in our careers. For many on the call, there are people in their 20s and 30s and 40s listening right now. How is this going to impact in a non-theoretical way, but a real practical way, your day to day? The next one is rapid urbanization. And so as we're seeing migration across the world, when people are coming into a country, whether in European countries or in North America, they're typically coming as immigrants to urban cores. And so what are the implications of that, and how is that going to change? How's that going to change the realities for all of our organizations? Climate change and resource scarcity, and resource scarcity could be water or other resources, especially as the environment and the appetite for fossil fuels continues to diminish, at least at an aspirational level. What are we going to do to manage and to relate with that? And then the final trend here of which I think is probably most relevant for today's audience is technological breakthroughs. What are the implications of the speed of bandwidth and the speed of technology and the continued cost reduction, kind of in Moore's law of chips and other technology, making things much more available and accessible, going back to Africa, bringing technology to places that only 10 or 20 years ago would have just been financially impossible. And so as you look at these megatrends, and as you ask yourself the big question, are you paying attention? Are you paying attention? Are you noticing these at a broad level in the market? Are you noticing these, or is your organization talking about these more at a micro level within your organization? And here's just a couple of questions. I'm going to clear them relatively quickly, which leaders and industries are facing because of these global megatrends. Increased competition, decreased barriers to entry. There are industry after industry where we're getting into a new space that was so expensive, and because of technology breakthroughs and a variety of other shifts, it's just much easier to get into businesses in certain industries now. Risk of decreasing margins and perception of value. When you had higher barriers for entry, it was easier to justify the cost that was being incurred by the marketplace or the consumers. But now with this increased competition and things becoming more and more commoditized, we have to really face these questions. Fragmentation of your industry and of many other industries need to become more customer focused. So with more transparency and with more efficiency in value chains and supply chains, and consumers now wanting to see on their products, what is the value chain of this product? We need to become much more focused on the customer, the end customer, priorities than we would have had to, once again, just a few decades ago. Unparalleled consumer access to information. I just spoke to that. The need to be more adaptive and entrepreneurial. And so this idea of entrepreneurial and speed and being nimble and being adaptable and being able to reinvent. And then as we hold these mega trends, what I'm going to do now and take you into a relatively quick history of the United States military and how the military a couple of decades ago was really struggling with their own megatrends. They were not using, obviously, the PwC megatrends, but they were doing their own research and asking themselves how to stay adaptable and nimble in the role of being a military force, and how the United States military actually coined what has now become a very widely used acronym, VUCA, which I will be defining for you. When I clear the VUCA definition, I'm going to open it up for some questions, and we're going to do a little Q&A and a little chatting, and then that'll be our first interactive part, and then we'll continue as we move into the leadership implications of these environmental trends. All right. So as I said, United States military, to be specific, the U.S. Army War College was asking some very important long-term strategic questions many years ago. And what they were asking themselves is, how can a military culture built on authority, control, and hierarchy, be expected to manage operating the traditional system, the status quo, the existing system of the military, and simultaneously, and this is the big move, how do we simultaneously manage and navigating through the unpredictable, messy journey to the future system? And so you may be saying to yourself, well, Rand, what does this have to do with me? I work in Minneapolis or Houston or any of these Calgary, any of these markets with a for-profit business. Why are we bringing in military strategy? And what the military puts in front of us here as a real gift is this idea of dynamic tension. Many of you are seeing in the media today, there's a lot of talk about the distinction between either or and both and. It's either this or this. It's either the traditional system or the future system. And what the military and what I would propose, all of us in all of our organizations, even at the departmental level, we are dealing with more and more complexity in our environments, these megatrends being part of that, but just general increase in complexity. And as we are finding ourselves as leaders in organizations in more complex times, we need to learn how to relate to the environment in more complex ways. And a both and, this and this, holding the dynamic tension between the two is a really critical emerging leadership capacity. Another way to think about this is often we're looking to solve problems. And when we see a problem, many of us grew up learning in school and ultimately in our careers, when there's a problem, we need to find the solution. And that's a problem to be solved. The military didn't have a problem to be solved. The military had a tension to be managed. And I really want to pause here and make a distinction between a problem to be solved and a tension to be managed. And I want you all to imagine that you had a rubber band right now between your two fingers. You grabbed a rubber band, you put it between your fingers, and you stretch the rubber band. And when you feel that tension in the rubber band, psychologically, emotionally, when human beings experience tension, the instinct is to relieve the tension, if you see my fingers here, is to take our fingers and to relieve the tension of the rubber band. The problem is that inside of that tension, if it is a creative tension, a both and tension, a dynamic tension, that what's in the rubber band metaphorically is the energy of change, the energy of transformation. And when you relieve the tension, you actually take the energy out of the system, out of the structure, out of the relationship. And so we want to be, and this is a real practical recommendation for all of us. When you feel tension today, tonight, tomorrow, in a conversation, what's your instinct? Do you want to make that tension go away? Do you want to lean into that tension? And how can we start to, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, it's not what happens, it's how we relate with what happens. It's that rhythm of relating to the world. And this right here is a dynamic tension. They have to actually be able to have the traditional system and the future system in a dynamic tension. People will often think that tension is a bad thing. And I want to be sensitive to this because there is tension, which is dysfunctional and can be pathological and can actually be very harmful. And so we have to look at the quality of tension. Is it a creative, dynamic tension, or is it a dysfunctional, pathological tension? And we need to be able to recognize the need to mitigate and try to reduce the negative tension while really celebrating the creative and dynamic tensions. And so finally, and then we're going to open up for questions, I'm going to clear the acronym. It's a little mysterious when people see VUCA, VUCA. And this has become surprisingly very commonplace now in corporate America, and really even in Europe. The world of business seems to really resonate with this military acronym and has found a lot of application in the marketplace. And the first letter here of the acronym is V, volatility. And so fast, unpredictable changes without clear patterns or trends. So we are all living in a highly volatile environment and becoming even more volatile with each passing month, quarter, and year. uncertain. So volatile and uncertain, frequent disruptive changes where the past is not a very good predictor of the future, where we are in uncharted territory, which I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, in places that our organizations have never been, where we as leaders have never been. The volatility would be difficult enough, but when you combine volatility with uncertainty, it becomes a compounding difficulty and challenge for leaders. The next one is complexity, which I've spoken about several times already. Multiple complex, intertwined technological, societal, geopolitical, and even ecological evolutions. So we are living in highly complex times. And then finally, ambiguity. And this one is one of the most critical. Little clarity on what is real or true, and it's difficult to predict the impact of action or initiatives. So a world with just one of these would be challenging for leaders. A world with two would be challenging, but now we've got all four of these in an interdependent, self-reinforcing way. Welcome to a VUCA world, a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. And we can look at this with overwhelm and say, how are we possibly going to manage as leaders, even if we're leading a department? How are we going to manage with this? And with the pandemic and all of the VUCA that came online with that, and with moving our work from physical to environments like we're in right now, and trying to figure out, are we going to go back to the way it was before? Are we going to stay more decentralized on Zoom? Or is there going to be a hybrid of some kind? These are all VUCA questions. And so I'm going to now go over with Justin as my partner here. If we have any questions, please go ahead and put those in, hit the Q&A button and ask your questions. Otherwise, I'm going to go over to the chat and I'm just going to do a little scrolling. And so let's see here. All right. Let's see. We've got Andrew. Was there ever a non-VUCA world? That's a great question. And so, Andrew, I'll ask that back to you. What is the answer to this question? Has the world ever been non-VUCA? I think that a lot of the materials that I've read historically about VUCA would suggest that, of course, the world has always had some level of VUCA to it. However, that there's an accelerating amplification because of the technological advances, because of the world becoming more and more globalized in the past 3, 4, 5 decades. It's no longer, as we saw with the virus again, it's no longer we're not able to practically isolate ourselves from the complexity of being an interdependent marketplace. The way that the supply chain works now, the dependency on so many different parts of the world for raw materials, what we're seeing right now with building materials, what we're seeing with chips for American vehicles. We're seeing a real lack of supply. It's just, in the old days, quote unquote old days, it was much more manageable, many would assert, to be able to manage in a with a more bounded world. But would love to see a few more things in chat. Anything that's landing for you, and questions. What questions do you see coming up for you here? Let's see. Well, we got Greg here. All right. Sending an email was a VUCA challenge for me in 1994. Yeah, you're right. This is I'm going to say it's relative, right? Because people can feel overwhelmed back in 1930s as new technology was coming on. So it's really, for me, I don't have an easy answer here. It's really a question of intensity and speed. I would say that the speed of change is unquestionably happening at a rate now that it was not happening 50 or 100 years ago. So we've got a question from Mark. Let's see. I'm going to go ahead and read this out. You guys can't see this because this is in the queue. While attempting to navigate the VUCA in a large organization, I would guess that there is a tendency to abandon the old and mandate the new. The cultural realities of this would create significant organizational distress. How should leaders manage the transition to guide the desired outcome? This is a really, thank you, Mark. This is a really important question. And I'm gonna pose it back to the dynamic tension. What I hear Mark asking is, when we are managing chaos, leading in chaos, there is a temptation to feel like, well, this was the old. If it's old, that means it's status quo. That means we need to actually now find the new. And that is almost binary. It's like an either this or that. Many of you are familiar with the name Jim Collins. He's written many important books. His real first, the first book that gave him a lot of notoriety was called Built to Last. And in Built to Last, he also wrote a book called Good to Great and many others. But in Built to Last, he introduced a beautiful popularization of something that you may be familiar with, all of you, called polarities. And a polarity is where two things that appear opposite can be true at the same time, or two things that one of them is not positive and negative. An easy would be, a polarity would be an in-breath and an out-breath. And if I were to say to you, which is better, the inhale or the exhale, well, you would say, well, neither of them is better. It's a polarity. There are positives of both of those. And if you have too much inhaling or too much exhaling, there's a negative. Just like short-term and long-term. Which one's better? Well, you've got to manage the tension between the short-term and the long-term. And if you have too much focus on the short-term, that's problematic. Short-termism, pathological short-termism. If you're too focused on the long-term and not paying attention to the current quarter, that actually has downsides too. What Collins did, and this is I've returned back to this, especially with our the environment we're in right now around racial justice, and the important call for change, for progress, for transformation, for the reckoning that so many Americans feel needs to happen, and I appreciate that call for progress. And what I also appreciate is what Jim Collins introduced in his Polarity is the preservation of the core. When he studied the companies that were built to last companies, enduring sustainable enterprises, what he did is he said, these companies understand how to manage the tension of preserving the core while simultaneously stimulating progress. So how do we preserve what we have, to Mark's question, and not or, and stimulate progress? How do we see the parts of America and the parts of capitalism that are incredibly healthy and that need to continue, while simultaneously looking at the shadow side of America, the shadow side of capitalism, and actually stimulate progress, the progression? And so much of the tension that I'm seeing in America today, I really believe at a cultural level, at a mindset level, at even a consciousness level, is the tension between those Americans that want to preserve, they're almost like a cultural preservationists, to preserve America and the parts of America that they are very proud of, with the progressives, the cultural progressives that want to stimulate progress. And instead of saying which one of these groups, which side of the polarity in a VUCA world, in a chaotic world, which one is right, I would say it's the wrong question. The right question is, how do we manage the tension to try to bring the light, the healthy part of both of these parts of the polarity, preserving the core of our business, of our country, of capitalism, you name it, and stimulating progress, the both and, in the context of managing complexity. And so we're going to do one more question here. And this is from Brad. Is it possible that the pandemic will expose leaders that are less adaptable? And for example, Jamie Dimon, and so one of the more visible financial leaders that we have in the country. And I think, Brad, what the pandemic does, and what any crisis does, is expose what's already there. And it was described to me once many years ago, and it was just the best metaphor I've ever heard about pressure. And the speaker said, it was on a big stage, and he said, when you take a orange and you squeeze the orange really hard, what comes out? And the answer is, what comes out is the juice from the orange. And then the question is, why does orange juice come out and not grape juice or not apple juice? Because what happens is the pressure, what that does is that squeezes and it brings out what's inside. The true character of an organization, of a leader, comes out with pressure. And so I'm not going to speak to Jamie Dimon in particular, but I will speak to, I think this is a really important question that we as leaders, and not just, people who are highly visible, but all of us are experiencing a level of pressure, are experiencing a level of chaos, are experiencing a VUCA environment, whatever description you want to use for this. Labels are not important. What's important is the principles underneath the labels, and that our entire system and our entire country is being squeezed right now. And unfortunately, what is coming out, and I think as a shadow, is a lot of the fear and a lot of the judgment and a lot of the resentment is coming out. And remember back to this idea of those Americans who want to preserve the American culture and those Americans who want to stimulate progress, the progressives and more of the traditionalists. And what we're seeing, unfortunately, is that those two sides, when they look at the other side and they're othering the other, they only tend to see and then amplify in their echo chambers of media the pathologies, to see the worst sides of each other. And I'm not actually proposing that there's one that's right and one that's wrong. That's like saying, is it the inhale or the exhale, Rand? You got to pick one. Which one's better? I won't do that because it's a polarity. And we're seeing the need for leaders who can actually understand and step into polarity management in a way that in my opinion, we've never seen the need for this kind of thinking before, and this kind of leadership capacity is to be able to hold tensions as opposed to just look for easy ways to solve problems and make that tension go away. So I'm going to go back over to the slides here. And what I want to do, and this is a subtle slide, and it's pretty confronting and pretty meant to be pretty personal. So I want all of you to think about yourselves. And I want you to think about the leaders in your organization. I want you to think about Jamie Dimon. Pick a public figure. We all exist in our known world. And the metaphor here is a snow globe. And inside this snow globe is our life's experiences, the territory of our life that we've actually included inside of what we could call our comfort zone. And so I want you to think about this just beautiful, warm, happy place that is where we are comfortable, our comfort zone, our known world. And now I want you to think about what VUCA points to and what the current environment is asking of us. Even a call to adventure might be called, to really step out of our known world and to step into a territory that we've actually never experienced. And so I'm going to call this the unknown world. And what you'll see on the outside of the snow globe, and these are actually European maps. This is imagery of real maps. And it's not widely known that when the Europeans were mapping the world, obviously on the left-hand side of the map, you're going to see territory, land that was charted. This is the charted territory, and this is the islands off of the land. On the right-hand side, and the bottom right-hand side, what you're going to see is, hold on here, got a little technical problem. Justin, can you still see my screen? Oh, we're back.
Yep.
Okay, we're back. Sorry about that, guys. And what you're going to see off to the right-hand side, and this is a really fun yet powerful concept. As the myth goes, the map makers would actually create pictures of monsters and serpents and dragons, and even write on some maps, "Here be dragons." And what "here be dragons" and what the images of monsters would represent is telling sailors, these waters, this part of the world is uncharted. This is uncharted territory. Therefore, it is dangerous. It is hostile. Do not go there. And so when we think about the unknown world and we think about the dragons that are waiting for not sailors, but for me, for you, for the people you work with, we all have our known world, and we all have the opportunity to move outside of the comfort zone of our known world into the unknown world. However, in the unknown world, because it's uncharted for us, we don't have experiences. It requires courage. It requires resilience. It requires a willingness to stay in the heat of that tension that we've been talking about. And this is I would propose the most important thing that I'm sharing today. As you think about the chaotic world, you came here to sort of learn about managing and leading in chaotic world. We could just say managing and leading in the unknown world, managing and leading in your unknown world, and how we move from the known world to the unknown world. There's only two ways that I know this happens. So I want you to imagine you're standing and there was a circle, and you're standing inside of a circle, and that metaphorically represents your happy place, where you have your experiences, your comfort zone. And so some people are pulled out of that known world, that comfort zone. They're forced out. And they're forced out through a crisis, a medical crisis, the death of a loved one. They're forced out through a bankruptcy. They're forced out, their business could be forced out by competition. So most, unfortunately, leaders and businesses find themselves forced out. There is another way out, and it's to choose out, to have the courage and to have the vision, to recognize the need to actually disrupt yourself. But in the absence of being forced out or choosing out, it's a very intoxicating place. It's called the status quo. And this is where, at least in my experience, where most leaders live. They live in this place of familiarity. They might think about intellectually the unknown world, but often are hesitant to step into that place because it is filled with disruption and it is filled with anxiety. But in the unknown world is where all the disruption and creativity and the transformation at a technological level, at a level of personal change and growth happens. The richness and the messiness that the military talked about that we grow from is actually outside of the known world. So I'm just curious. I'm going to look over to my Q&A. Do we have any questions around the known world or unknown world? And we're teeing up questions. Any questions? Otherwise, we're going to move on to the last handful of slides here. And Justin, can you give me, since I can't see our timer here, can you give me a time check right now?
You have 20 minutes.
20 minutes, perfect. All right, any questions on this? If not, let's get a little bit more operational, a little bit more practical. All right. So here's a powerful principle at our Leadership Academy in Dallas that our students, our leaders from all over the United States, really in Canada, are introduced to, and they work with our faculty. With awareness, there is choice. Without awareness, only habit. With awareness, we can choose. Remember, we leave our status quo because we're forced out or we choose out. Without awareness, only habituation. And habituation is where we are not the agent. We are not the one who is making the choice. Life is happening to us. And unfortunately, habituation is mostly unconscious, where we run consistent patterns. And those patterns are running us. The story of our life is being written for us, as opposed to we taking the pen okay, and putting it in our hand as adults and saying, I need to start asking myself different questions, and I need to see the opportunity, we would assert, to become the author of our own story, to become a self-authoring leader, a self-authoring and self-transforming leader who chooses as opposed to simply stay in habit. The movie The Matrix and many other movies would speak to this, of living in a state where we're just sleepwalking through life, where we're just intoxicated by the familiarity of our life. And so if you would say, well, Rand, this seems a little bit kind of abstract, a little bit philosophical, I would ask you, what are you doing to create interruptions in your own comfort zone, in your own pattern? Are you doing things when you notice that you're uncomfortable? Are you able to notice that you're uncomfortable? And are you able to relate with that in a way that's not habitual, that's conscious, and that you can then use that awareness, that consciousness, to then choose to lean in anyway, choose a path forward that is more deliberate and more intentional. I will illustrate. I was on a Zoom call, a global Zoom call with about 15 people this morning. And during the call, I made a comment, and my comment was challenged by someone else on the call, someone who I had never met before. And it was a fairly high stakes conversation. And what I noticed when he made a critique of my comment, I noticed in my bones, in my chest in particular, I noticed a contraction. I noticed a sense of defensiveness. And I was able to notice that. I was able to name it. I was able to be curious and say, that's really interesting. I thought I made a really good point. He made a counterpoint. And maybe what I'll do is I'll appreciate him for challenging me, and I'll actually use the awareness to choose to name the tension between our opposing positions and to appreciate him and to say, thank you for challenging me, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to notice. Now, I got a little defensive. I actually said this. I got a little defensive. And that gives me the opportunity to ask myself, why? And I did this, and it was very quick, and I did it in a hopefully an effective and skillful way. I saw the rest of the group appreciate that this was not just a habitual, like, I didn't really like what he said. They'd read my facial expression. They'd pick up on cues. But instead, I was giving you a very pedestrian example. I have my awareness of what's going on for me and how I was relating with that pushback. And I was able to choose consciously and out loud, in this particular case, a different path forward. And so I'm going to wrap us before our final Q&A with this idea of going from one level to the next. And at our organization, what we have found is that move from current level to next level, for most leaders, is really a move out of reactivity into consciousness, out of reactivity and habit into choice, into being deliberate, into being intentional. When we are in reactivity, life is happening to us. When we are in consciousness, okay, we have the pen, we are authoring the story of our life. And we can overlay this idea of reactivity to consciousness in a variety of different ways. But we have one slide that unpacks these hallmarks. And like I said, you'll get a chance to not only get these slides, but also get as an attendee of today's breakout, but also be able to watch the video if you just want to fast forward to the end here, because this is really, for me, the most important application component of today's presentation. We start big picture, we start with megatrends, we move into VUCA, we talk about the difficulty of dealing with complexity and not just looking for easy outs to solve problems, but manage tensions. And now we really ground ourselves in the hallmarks of moving from reactive to conscious. And I'd love to get questions on this slide. I'll leave this slide up for the end of our time together as we do Q&A. So in reactivity, now I want you to personalize this, if you all could, in your own reactivity. If you were to say, well, Rand, do you find yourself reacting? Absolutely. If I'm not sleeping enough, if I'm traveling too much, if I'm sick, I will find myself contracting into my less resourceful self, and I'll find myself in my own reactivity. And so when we're in reactivity, we tend to be driven by habit, as opposed to in consciousness being guided by intention. When we're in reactivity, and that habituation tends to put us in a place where we are guarded and distracted. We're playing defense. We're distracted. We're overwhelmed. We're reacting, as opposed to being open and self-aware. And so just take a very simple idea here, that if I'm pushing myself, and if I'm not sleeping enough, if I'm not taking care of my body and my health, I'm going to be more likely on the reactive side than on a place where I'm well rested, I'm exercising, and I'm able to be much more grounded, much more open and self-aware. It's hard to have awareness when we're in this place of overwhelm and scrambling. When we are in reactivity, and this is language is really subtle and important, here's what I will hear, and I would invite you to notice language for the next couple of days of people around you. Here's the language that we'll hear when we're around someone who's in reactivity. They'll say, I have to, I need to. I have to, I need to does not have responsibility. If someone says, oh, I have to travel for my work all the time. My job is really hard because I'm always traveling. I have to travel. There's no responsibility there. As opposed to in consciousness, I want to, I choose to. I took a job where I'm expected to be on airplanes. I choose this job. I want to do this job. There's a level of a quality of responsibility in this shift that is critically important. Language for students of leadership, language matters, and language matters a lot, because what language does is language actually points to, from a root cause, points to what's going on in our emotions and what's going on in our thinking. And what's going on in our emotions and our thinking is flowing from our sense of self, our sense of identity. So our identity drives our thinking and our feeling. And our thinking and our feeling drives the language and the behaviors around in our world. And so when you say, oh, is language really important? Language is very, very important. It's an incredible clue into whether someone is coming from more of a reactive place or a conscious place. Defined by outcomes. We work with, in our organization, our faculty, we work with very accomplished, high-performing leaders. We work with people who are already in many ways at the top of their game, and they have the humility to realize that there's always opportunities to improve and get better. If you look at professional athletes, you don't see people at the professional level saying, hey, I'm a professional, I don't need any coaches. You see professional athletes surrounding themselves with more and more coaches, more trainers, more support as you get higher up. And so in reactivity with high performers, you tend to see at a psychological level, people defining themselves by the outcome. We had a goal as a team, and we either achieved that goal or didn't achieve it. If we achieved it, I feel good, I'm a good person. If we didn't achieve it, I'm a bad person at an identity level, as opposed to at the conscious level, we're informed by outcomes. Going back to the US military in special forces, some of you know the term after action review. The military understands that you have a mission, you either achieve or you do not achieve your mission, but immediately afterwards, you do an after action review where you learn from what happened, okay, what worked, what didn't work, and how can we learn and inform ourselves by what worked and what didn't work, and become better the next time that we have an objective or a mission. And so that's a really important one to be asking yourself. When you win at work, do you feel like you're a better person than when you lose at work? Is it possible that you're the same person regardless, and that the outcome outside of you, it's not what happens, but how we relate with what happens, is an opportunity to get better and learn and grow and not be overly harsh as it relates to the human being that you are because of the result. All right. And clearing out the slide here, I'm getting ready for Q&A. Certainty seeks to defend boundaries. Leaders who are in reactivity are leaders who are, if you were to say, just bottom line this, it's about certainty. Look at the hyperpolarization in America today. Look at what is being stoked, especially on both sides, the left and right, by media. There's a certainty versus at a conscious level, we have a curiosity, seeks to explore boundaries. But if you just bottom line it, the move from certainty to curiosity, that's what happened to me today. I got triggered. I got emotionally grabbed by this comment. And instead of getting defensive and instead of, trenching in, I actually got curious. Why did that comment, why did that critique of what I said, why did that cause me to feel the way I was feeling? That is if there was one on here that's probably the most practical to practice with, it's just spend your days being more curious. Spend your days noticing when you get defensive. Spend your days noticing when you get sad, when you get angry, when you get righteous, self-righteous, and ask yourself, that's really interesting. And I'll give you a challenging exercise. The people in your life that when you're around them, you tend to get the most irritated, the most angry, the most defensive, the most judgmental. That's not about them, that's about you. Because when I'm angry or defensive, that's going on inside of me. Instead of me saying, she made me angry, he made me upset, I can actually look at that and say, this is really interesting. Whenever I'm around this person, it could be a family member, it could be a spouse, it could be a child, it could be someone that you're very close to at work. These people who, when we're around them, they're mirrors to us, because what they actually reveal back to us is the gaps in our own leadership game. Because if I was more resourced, if I was more capable, if I was more developed, the comment that man made today, I would have been able to appreciate it, but it wouldn't have impacted me the way it did, which shows me how much growth I still have to do. And this is never a destination. This is always just a continuous journey of improvement. But be curious would be my hope for all of you. And the last one, I've already spoken to this. In reactivity, we seek to relieve tension as opposed to embrace tension as a source of energy. And so I'm going to ask Justin once again for a time check here as we wrap with our final Q&As.
You've got about 7 minutes left.
Excellent. All right. So we've got an anonymous question here. Do you have an example of leaders who choose out? I'm not sure what our anonymous person is asking. I don't know if I understand the context.
I think this was in reference to the slide with the known world and the here be monsters.
Oh, yeah, I can give you guys, thank you. It's great to have Justin's support here. There are a lot of leaders who I could say have demonstrated this consciousness to actually choose out. I'll just use someone really simple, because we all know Andy Grove, who is the leader of Intel. And so one of the things that Intel did, which is around S curves, is that Andy realized, he has a very famous quote called "Only the Paranoid Survive." What he realized is that each one of their chips had its own product S curve. And as they were experiencing incredible success on the 286 or 386 chip, most organizations would actually ride out the status quo of like, look, we've got the dominant chip, and what we're going to do is we're going to ride this out, and we're going to continue to dominate. And what he realized is they needed to actually disrupt themselves, and they needed to start working on the next family of chips, the next version of chips, far before they had actually ridden out the success of the current chip. So it was a culture. Intel, when he was leading it, was a culture of disruption and a culture of reinvention. And guys, it is wildly rare and painful to be a dominant player and to actually ask yourself, how are we positioned with our dominance to actually fail? And instead of being disrupted by a competitor, how do we disrupt ourselves? Now let's compare that to RIM, BlackBerry, who had an 84% market share at one point and did not follow that same choosing out that Andy Grove did? So that's a great question, Anonymous, whoever you are. And I really appreciate Justin giving me the context there. All right, so let's see here. We got another question from Mark. With awareness comes choice. However, with choice comes accountability. That can create fear among leaders. How would you advise leaders to embrace that awareness that is necessary for managing chaos? Wow, just a beautiful big question that ties together the whole theme of the breakout today on managing chaos. And I would say, Mark, that courage is, I'm going to go back to that word. What we don't hear a lot of is leaders who are in the messiness, in the heat of change and transformation. We love to tell stories about leaders who are all the pretty stuff, but not the sausage making side, not what's really going on behind the scenes. What we need to be able to do, I would assert, and me included as leaders, is actually recognize that sense of uncertainty, the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, that VUCA world, that creates in us naturally a sense of anxiety. Okay, and I'm not going to use the word fear, because I actually think that fear is more on the reactive side. If you want to think about the sort of dynamic of fear and love, and I'm not talking just about the soft part of love. There's a tough part of love that is necessary too. But I would put love in the sort of next level consciousness, and I'd put fear in reactivity. And I'll differentiate here as probably my last comment, is that the anxiety that's necessary for change and transformation can be actually highly productive, because when we are in our own anxiety, we are in our uncharted territory. We are in the place of dragons. We are in that place of being confronted with experiences that we have no experiences with, no cycles with, no patterns with, and that place can anxiety that is denied can actually make us unproductive and even unhealthy. Anxiety that is fully confronted and fully lived into can actually be the fuel for transformation and growth. Peter Kastenbaum, who's a very famous existential philosopher, speaks a lot about this, and he says the practical formula for leadership transformation and leadership change, the practical formula is go where the pain is. If you want to build your muscle, productive distress on those muscles, not pushing yourself too hard, but pushing yourself just enough to feel for those muscles to feel the anxiety and the productive distress. It's a paradox of growth and transformation. And so with that, Justin, I'm assuming we are at the hour.
Yep, about time to wrap up.
And so is there any other logistics? I've already shared that the video will be posted on Monday. I want to thank everyone for coming and being on the chat. I couldn't follow the chat while I was doing with the slides, but everybody can save the chat, which I'm doing right now by hitting the three little buttons and saving it to your Zoom folder. And just once again, I hope you can continue to attend other breakouts that are happening in the EDGE conference. And thank you to Improving for all that you all do to promote learning and growth, not just in the old days physically, but now virtually to all the markets you serve around the country. So thank you guys so much.